Right now, somewhere in your house, there is a switch that can banish darkness in less than a second. For nearly the entire existence of our species, that power simply did not exist, and the hours after sunset were not a time for sleep. They were a completely different world, one governed by rules almost none of us would recognize today. We tend to imagine our ancestors collapsing at dusk, exhausted from a day of hunting and gathering, sleeping straight through until dawn like some kind of biological switch flipping off. It's a comforting image. It's also almost certainly wrong. For most of human history, night wasn't empty time. It was some of the busiest, strangest, most socially important time our species ever experienced. And figuring out what actually happened during those hours completely changes the way you think about the darkness outside your own window tonight. If uncovering the hidden version of history most people never learn is your kind of thing, you're going to want to stick around for this one. So go ahead and subscribe before we get into it. To understand what night actually looked like before electricity, you first have to understand what darkness actually meant. Without streetlights, without headlights, without a single artificial glow for hundreds of miles in any direction, night wasn't just dim. It was a wall. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Every rustle in the brush could be the wind, or it could be a predator, and there was no way to know which until it was far too close. That uncertainty should have kept our ancestors frozen in their shelters until sunrise. And yet, evidence suggests something very different was happening once the sun went down. Here's the first thing that reshapes everything. Early humans didn't sleep in one long, unbroken block the way most of us do today. Historians studying pre-industrial sleep patterns discovered something that initially seemed almost unbelievable. Many societies before artificial lighting slept in two separate segments, with a period of quiet wakefulness in between, sometimes lasting 1 to 2 hours, right in the middle of the night. This wasn't insomnia. It wasn't a disorder. It was simply how human sleep naturally unfolded for thousands of years before something changed it. And that gap in the middle of the night wasn't wasted. People used it. They talked quietly with whoever else was awake. They tended to small tasks. Some prayed. Some simply lay in the dark, thinking in a kind of mental space modern humans rarely experience anymore, uninterrupted, undistracted, completely alone with their own thoughts in a way that almost never happens now. There's something else worth noticing here, something almost nobody thinks about until it's pointed out. Modern sleep research has found that when people are placed in environments without artificial light for extended periods, cut off from clocks, screens, and electric bulbs entirely, their sleep naturally drifts back toward that same two-part pattern our ancestors likely experienced: a period of rest, a stretch of quiet wakefulness, and then a second period of rest before dawn. It's as if the body remembers a rhythm the modern world simply overwrote. That single detail suggests something unsettling and fascinating at once. The exhaustion so many people feel today, the frustration of lying awake at 3 a.m. convinced something is wrong with them, may not be a malfunction at all. It may be an old rhythm reasserting itself in a world that no longer has any patience for it. Think about that the next time you wake up at 3 in the morning and immediately reach for your phone, annoyed at yourself for being awake. Your ancestors would have found that moment completely unremarkable. For most of human history, that quiet wakefulness in the dark wasn't a problem to fix. It was simply part of the night. But sleep, broken or not, was only one piece of what happened after dark. And this is where the story takes its first real turn. Fire changed everything. Once early humans mastered fire, night stopped being purely dangerous. It became something else entirely. A stage. Around that fire, protected by its light and warmth, something happened that some anthropologists believe may be one of the most important developments in human history: storytelling. During the day, human conversation tends to be practical. Where's the water? Who saw which animal? What needs fixing? But researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer societies found something remarkable. After dark, conversation topics shifted dramatically, moving away from practical matters and toward stories, myths, and social information. Gossip about relationships, memories of the past, cautionary tales about what happens to those who break the group's rules. One widely cited study on a hunter-gatherer community found that most daytime conversation was practical, but the vast majority of nighttime conversation was devoted to storytelling. That single shift may explain something extraordinary about how human culture actually spreads. Firelight created the conditions for something daylight never could. In the dark, with fewer distractions, no tasks demanding attention, and faces lit only by flickering orange light, stories landed differently. They stuck. Children raised on nightly stories around the fire were absorbing history, morality, and survival knowledge, all wrapped inside narratives compelling enough to hold attention purely through voice and firelight. This is where the story stops being about ancient campfires and starts being about something happening in your own living room tonight. Because that instinct never disappeared. It just moved indoors and changed shape. The magnetic pull of a glowing screen in a dark room. The specific comfort of a story told after the lights go down. Movie night. A bedtime story for a child. Scrolling through a feed under the covers. That pull may be older than language itself. Night, it turns out, wasn't dead time. Our ancestors were simply trying to survive. It appears to have been one of the primary engines of human culture, the original theater where information, meaning, and connection were passed from one generation to the next. But storytelling wasn't the only thing happening in the dark, and this next layer might be even stranger. Night was also, for many ancient societies, deeply spiritual. Darkness collapsed the usual boundaries of the physical world. Distant sounds seemed to arrive from nowhere. Shapes blurred into shadow. The sky itself transformed into an enormous, moving map. It's no coincidence that so many cultures developed elaborate mythologies specifically tied to the night sky, and rituals meant to be performed only after dark. Some researchers argue this wasn't superstition getting in the way of rational thought. It was rational thought applied to conditions daylight simply didn't create. Night forced a kind of psychological vulnerability that daylight hours never demanded. Reduced visual input, heightened uncertainty, a world temporarily governed by sound, feeling, and imagination instead of clear sight. And there's a twist buried inside that vulnerability. Some anthropologists suggest this nightly shift in perception may have played a role in strengthening social bonds within early human groups. When you can't fully trust your eyes, you rely more heavily on the people beside you. Voice, touch, shared presence. In a very real sense, the dark may have made early humans need each other more, and that dependency, repeated night after night for thousands of generations, may have quietly reinforced the cooperative instincts still wired into you today. That's not ancient history staying in the past. That's the reason a dark, unfamiliar room still feels different with someone else in it. Even now. There's one more piece to this puzzle, and it might be the most human part of the entire story. Night was dangerous, unpredictable, and full of genuine threats our ancestors couldn't always see coming. And still, they gathered anyway. They told stories anyway. They stayed close to each other anyway, choosing connection even when isolation might have felt safer. That single decision, made around countless fires across tens of thousands of years, may be one of the quiet reasons human culture became as rich, complex, and deeply social as it is today. So tonight, when the sun goes down and the world outside your window disappears into darkness, notice what happens inside. The instinct to gather, the pull toward a story, a screen, a familiar voice, the strange comfort of not being alone once the light fades. None of that is random. None of that is new. It's simply the oldest part of you, quietly showing up again, the same way it has every single night since the very first fire.